Affairs Council of Atlanta. We've moved to online programming, and I'm delighted to welcome President Mark Becker as our guest for the next 45 minutes. Just a couple of things to make sure everybody's okay. Ladarian Gillette, who is the producer of this, has got everybody muted when you come on. And also the only person I can see is Mark, not anybody else. We've got your videos, I don't know what's the right word, muted, turned off. But we do want you to send questions, please, using the chat function, which you will see in the middle of the screen, right at the bottom. And if you click on that, you can type in a question. Please send it to Fernanda Lucchine. She's going to try to combine those questions and send them to me. See how this is going to work via the chat, and so that I can ask Mark. It turns out the last time we did this, I wasn't smart enough to talk and edit the questions at the same time. So, yeah, here we go. So,
second chance, Charles. Second chance.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do better this time. So, all of you on this call know Mark Becker. You wouldn't have signed up for this. Mark is the president of Georgia State University, which has 53,000 students, 6 campuses, 3,000 international students. I don't know how many students were studying abroad when all of this happened. And obviously faculty members working abroad. You have dorms and full of students, or at least at one time. Got multiple constituencies from the Board of Regents to the students, their parents, the staff. Turning Georgia State University around, it's got to be something like turning an aircraft carrier around. I mean, how did this work for you, Mark?
Well, I think to start with, Charles, is you're bringing back a lot of memories just talking about all those numbers and all those constituents. You know, as we, I think, all have experienced, the COVID-19, which started as a epidemic centered in Wuhan, China, eventually moved beyond China and started to see cases in South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, other parts of Asia, some in Vietnam, not so many at the time, and then it jumped to a big break in northern Italy, et cetera. So, in the beginning, the focus really was about getting students back who were in areas that were experiencing the epidemic. So it was getting students out of China, canceling programs to China, quickly moving to other parts of Asia. And I would say that, just thinking back on that, when it seems like months ago, but it was only more than a little bit, only about a month ago, the first issue was not just their health and safety, but it became very clear very quickly that airlines and countries were going to be reducing the ability to travel. And so we spent a lot of time in the early days communicating with students who were abroad and faculty who were abroad, or students and faculty who were planning to go abroad. And at first it was students like, well, I don't want to come back, it's not that bad here, and having to get them to understand that if they did not act within a certain period of time, there was some possibility that they would not be able to get back. When the president announced that the United States would stop travel from China, it was 48 hours, that was a 48-hour notice. And so, there are only so many seats on so many airplanes available in that kind of notice. So that was really a lot of the attention in the very earliest days. But as it moved into Italy, in the Milan area, northern Italy, and then jumped across the border north into the Alps, et cetera, it became very clear that it was only a matter of time until we were going to be dealing with this in a large way in the US. And the first and most immediate attention was the question of how would we complete the semester. And everybody now is living through the experience, which is that we're completing the semester by doing all education at a distance. And I want to be very clear about language. We refer to this as education at a distance as opposed to online, because what the students are taking in experience now is not a course that was designed to be delivered online. It will not necessarily have the same high quality graphics and other content that you expect in a real high quality online course. But it was the ability to basically take the entire university curriculum for the semester and move it to being delivered at a distance remotely using online technologies. And so, we were in a hurry up and wait mode at one point because Georgia State being a public entity, we're part of the University System of Georgia. The University System of Georgia is part of the state government of Georgia. And that it was very clear early on that institutions within the public sector, within the University System of Georgia, would not be acting independently, that a decision to continue the semester at a distance or to start educating at a distance would be statewide and it wouldn't be institution-wide.
So you could not make that decision on your own?
No, that was not an option. We had a lot of calls, a lot of discussions. The governor has a task force, coronavirus task force. The chancellor of the University System of Georgia, Dr. Steve Wrigley, is on that task force. And so a lot of what we've had to do, what we've had to communicate, has been coordinated in that way, shape, and fashion. So there's a lot of decisions that get made that we do have local autonomy or responsibility for, but something as big as the decision first to suspend classes for 2 weeks and reopen online was at the state level, and then the decision to go all the way to the end of the semester was at the state level. And then thirdly, the decision that all instruction for May, June, and July up to the end of summer session will be online. And I'll say online there because what we're working on right now is making sure that what we provide to students for the summer sessions, Maymester and summer sessions, will be of a high quality that's designed and to be delivered from the beginning to the end of using technology.
You're a biostatistician by academic background, and you worked in that field for a long time. Did that give you an advantage? Did your spidey sense start tingling earlier than everybody else's, that this was going to be a really serious issue for everyone?
I won't say that my biostatistics background gave me as much an experience as this isn't my first rodeo. And so I was the Dean of Public Health at the University of Minnesota in 2003 when SARS happened. And by the time we got done dealing with SARS, I was also Assistant Vice President for Public Health Preparedness and Emergency Response. So, been through the scenario where we've had an infectious disease outbreak. SARS is actually much more deadly, meaning it kills a higher percentage of those who get infected. But fortunately, it was much less infectious, meaning it was harder to spread than this current coronavirus. So I've been through that before, where my, what I'll call my quantitative background, my statistical background came into play is being able to get some sense of what kind of timelines we were looking at. So I know Rich Phillips is on this call. He'll remember discussions talking about, that based in the early days, meaning a month ago, seeing that, the number of infectious cases in Georgia would continue to build. And even at that point, just based on the data that we were seeing out of China and the early data out of Italy, and given what we know about epidemics and infectious diseases, that the number of cases would build for a period of probably 4 to 6 weeks. And then once you get to that peak, you don't just suddenly drop off. You sort of stay steady for a while before you start to see a decline. So even over a month ago, what you're now seeing in the media with the models coming out is consistent with, what my gut intuition from having seen things like this before was, which is here in Georgia, we will most likely peak towards the latter half to the end of this month. There will still be a lot of cases around into early May. Things will eventually level off. We should have some sense of normalcy. And when I say normalcy, be very clear, normalcy in terms of the number of cases by June. There should be many fewer. But then we enter into a very different normal for us because there is no vaccine for this, or to my knowledge, any of the major coronaviruses. And all the projections so far are that only up to and about a third of the population is going to get infected between, let's say, now and June. And that will not get you what the epidemiologists call herd immunity. Herd immunity is that you've had enough people sick that you don't have to worry about an epidemic, because there's a lot of immune people in the population and it's hard for the virus to spread. But if we only get about a third of the people sick by late May, early June, we have what I'll call a wave 2 and even wave 3 problem, which is herd immunity for this virus right now. What we're hearing is 85%. And so if only a third of the people have been sick by the end of May, beginning of June, we're a long way from 85%, and we'll almost certainly see it come back in some way, shape, or form, absent a vaccine. Best hope of a vaccine is sometime about a year from now at this point. And there's a lot we don't know about this virus, and we can go into that if you like. But so, what we're dealing with right now is we know we're online for the summer. We know that we're going to continue to work at a distance and telework and continue to have meetings and programs like this into the summer. What we don't know is what the next wave looks like and how disruptive it is. I mean, what are we going to learn from this first wave? What are we going to learn in terms of how do we restart our economy? Because we're also, not only are we looking at a 100-year pandemic, we're also looking at a 100-year recession in terms of the depths and damage that's going to happen to the labor force and to the overall economy, based on the information that at least I'm seeing from some of the presentations I've been able to be part of. So there's a lot that we don't know, and there's a lot that we have to prepare for, and hopefully we'll end up in a situation where we'll prepare for more than we have to do.
Can you talk about leadership for a little bit? I mean, if you've got an incident on campus, you've got a natural disaster, it's got a beginning and an end that are much easier to deal with. I mean, here you're stuck at home in your jeans. You can't walk around the campus. You can't meet with students as easily as you could before, as good as all these online platforms are. I mean, how is leadership and your leadership different now than it was last semester, than it was in normal times?
Yeah, so just to give you a sense of, the rhythm of the day now is, multiple calls per day, a lot of video calls, some conference phone calls still, but just about everything is moving to online platforms, and a lot of it to video. So, before this, 6 weeks ago, I met with my leadership team once a week, and my travel schedule was such that of the 52 weeks in the year, take away vacation, probably another 15 of those would get canceled because of travel and other obligations. At this point, I'm meeting with that team every day of the week, Monday through Friday. So Monday through Friday, an hour every day. And it's just that the amount of information sharing is absolutely essential, because every day a new challenge appears. And it's, we need to be able to pull the resources of our technology people, our communications people, our fundraising people. I mean, we've started an emergency assistance fund for students who have immediate financial needs that can't be met through the normal financial aid mechanisms. And many of those are food. They just don't have a way to get food. They don't have they've lost their job and they don't have the money or access to the money right now. And so being able to push out grocery store shopping carts to them in literally 24 hours, less than 24 hours from the time they make the request. So our leadership team every day at a preset time meets for an hour, and we go through everybody, that's 12 people plus me, total of 13. And everybody, brings up what they're learning, what they're working on, what they're talking about. And, the beauty of this is when you build a strong leadership team and you've got people that you've worked with and you can delegate to them and they're not going to drop the ball, things get done. And that's, and so of course it's then from me to them, and then they have their calls with their teams. And it has actually worked remarkably well. I never would have predicted that things have been as smooth as they've been compared to the level of disruption that our students, faculty, and staff have experienced.
How's the faculty responded? I mean, they're at all universities, faculty are remarkably independent. That's part of what academic freedom is about. They don't seem often to take direction well. How have they responded to this crisis?
The faculty have been just absolutely terrific. You know, when you talk about moving the entire curriculum for over 50,000 students, roughly 53,000 students, and that is a heavy lift, and that requires everybody to buy in. Just to put it in perspective, I think we're in our second week of courses this way. I've heard personally from 2 students. So out of the 50,000 plus students, 2 have written me to basically say their professor has not answered their email or is not active on the forum that they're supposed to be. So that's quite miraculous to me. And a lot of that credit goes to our provost, Wendy Hensel. She working with the deans and the department chairs. And we in the beginning of this, we got all the department chairs on a WebEx and, went through a lot of questions, because we literally had 2 weeks to pull this work off. And the faculty, the chairs, the deans, the provost, and our technology support people and our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, which supports faculty in doing teaching in general, and particularly being able to teach using these tools in this fora. They've just been incredible. People are putting in really long hours to make sure the faculty get the support that they need, and our technology people, going out in very short orders, getting additional resources like VPN for certain of our applications. We were quickly overwhelmed because we could only have 1,000 VPN connections. Never been a problem before. We'd never had more than 500 or 600 simultaneous users. And all of a sudden we needed to be able to support thousands. But by this week, we were now able to support over 21,000. So, it's just the contributions and through the entire organization, faculty and staff, and then the students. The students are, because of our, we've been early adopters of using technologies to help support our students. We were able to tell whether or not students are engaging with the material the faculty are putting up, and we're seeing well over 90% engagement.
What happens with the 10%? Those who've just aren't online, aren't following the classes, or got other priorities for whatever reason. What happens to them?
So that again, it goes back to the fact that Georgia State is a leader in supporting students. The systems we have, so all of our advisors, and every student is assigned to an advisor. Our advising center, all the advisors have dashboards, and they can actually see who hasn't engaged with the platform that they're using in so many days. And then if they're more than a few days with not engaging, the advisor then contacts the student, and they actually have they have a conversation, whether it be video or over phone, about are these technology issues you're having, are they curricular issues, what is it? And so we've got the nudges in place. The other pieces that we have, we've been using our chatbot named Pounce, which is a text-based, artificially intelligent question and answer platform, texting platform, to be able to get information out to students quickly and to be able to provide them with access to the questions. So, overall, we all the technology we were using for traditional learning has now been brought to bear in this world as well.
What happens? You mentioned earlier that this is not just a 100-year pandemic; it's a 100-year depression. What does that depression do to Georgia State's business model?
That's too early to say. And so there's for us, there's 2 major revenue streams. The bulk of our budget comes from tuition and fees is the largest revenue stream. And then the second is the state of Georgia. And so, so where are the risks in that? The risks are students won't be able to afford to stay in school, so they won't be back for the summer or fall. So that's risk number 1. And then risk number 2 is when the economy grinds to a halt, as it has here in Georgia, as we all shelter in place, the state tax collections from just sales tax are going to plummet. on top of that, with the massive levels of unemployment, I mean, it's unprecedented to have over 6 million people file for unemployment in a week. The previous record was 660,000, I think, from March of 2009. So a tenfold increase. It's just off the charts. And the previous week was a fivefold increase over the previous record. So you've got a lot less people making income and paying income tax. So, what we know is our fiscal year that will start July 1 is going to look very different. How different, we don't know, because the third unknown here is the role of the federal government. We've had 3 stimulus packages passed out of the U.S. Congress and signed by the President of the United States, providing a lot of assistance to individuals, greatly opening up the requirements for unemployment, greatly enhancing the benefits under unemployment. So hopefully that will benefit many of our students who are working and have lost work. And we're certainly, through our financial advising center, trying to make sure our students, when they reach out for financial help, are aware of all the programs that could potentially help them. So there's that unknown at the federal side. There's also going to be almost certainly more federal stimulus packages. There's a couple of them in the works right now, one in the Senate, one in the House. We believe that the one in the House will lead to substantial funds to assist municipalities and states with bridging the revenue shortfalls. We also, the higher education community, I mean, we have our own organizations in Washington, D.C. There's a group of 6 major organizations that basically represent everything from public to private, small liberal arts to big, massive research universities. And so they are coordinating with our ask for what would be in the next stimulus package that would assist us, the higher education institutions. So, we know a lot about where our questions are, but we don't know what the Department of Education rules are going to be to roll out the funds that have already been approved for higher ed and Stimulus 3. We don't know if we're going to get Stimulus 4. We believe that the rules in Stimulus 4 will be the same as the rules in Stimulus 3. We don't know how much they're going to help the states. We don't know what's exactly going to happen to state revenues. What we do know right now is, at least at this point, even after the announcement to move all of our summer courses online, is that enrollments for the summer are generally on par with last year, in some cases even ahead. So, so far, the enrollment side is looking robust, but we're very early into this.
Yeah, just a footnote for our listeners, and that is to remind everybody that under the state constitution, the state of Georgia can't run a deficit the way the federal government can, and nor can the cities. So that's going to present real challenges as tax revenues drop. Exactly.
The states and the cities cannot issue debt to keep operating. Only the federal government can do that. And so you're going to see the federal balance sheet take on a lot more debt, and I don't see any other way that that we're going to get through this. And the question is going to be how much and for how long.
Are there any provisions in the CARES Act, Stimulus 3, as you call it, that help universities, that are aimed at universities, or that are written with schools like Georgia State in mind?
So it's a great question, and the answer is yes, but, and the but is we don't know the rules. So the CARES Act has over $30 billion in it for education, 45% of that to K through 12, 45% of that to higher education, and the remaining 10% is available at the request of the governors to help with educational issues in their state as they see the needs, whether they be K through 12 or higher ed. So the higher ed number at 30 billion, 45%, roughly, I think 13 billion for higher education. Now that's going to go out to over thousands of institutions, because that's everything from literally from barber schools to the largest, most complex universities in the country, say Arizona State with over 100,000 students, many campuses and medical school and online, et cetera. What the government did do in the CARES Act is they did come up with a formula to decide how to allocate that money out to universities. And there's several provisions in there that directly benefit Georgia State, and particularly Georgia State students. And that is the calculation of how much will go to an institution is more weighted towards institutions with a large number of Pell students that are eligible for federally funded Pell grants. At Georgia State, that's roughly 60% of our population. There's also additional money in the CARES Act, a smaller number within that $13 billion to go to minority serving institutions. And I think, as everybody recognizes, Georgia State's majority minority, so we will qualify for some of those dollars as well. Also in the CARES Act, all the money that is allocated will be allocated to the institutions. However, 50% of what goes to the institutions is to be used for the immediate support of students. And so that money that we receive is then to go out through the financial aid mechanism to deal with the financial emergencies, the financial aid issues of our students. So that's all good news. Georgia State expects to be able to put, because of the systems, the technology, and the work we're already doing, be able to put that money to use very quickly. The problem is the federal government wrote the CARES Act. It did not come up with the mechanism for getting the money out the door and giving us the rules by which we would be allowed or expected to spend those dollars. So we're in a place where we've known for a week that there's going to be money coming to Georgia State. There's going to be money to help students. It will not be enough to deal with all that we're dealing with and we will be dealing with. At start, we expect more in Program 4. But the Department of Education, as one of my colleagues in Washington has said, has gone dark. They have not issued any guidance whatsoever. The National Governors Association wrote to Secretary DeVos yesterday asking that the department get these guidance out very quickly and to provide maximum flexibility. But that letter went to the secretary yesterday. We've heard no response. The word on the street is it could be 2 or 3 more weeks before we'll know what the Department of Education decides are the rules. And Charles, you've worked in the federal bureaucracy, so you understand about rulemaking and those sorts of things.
I do, and not only that, but Department of Education is a relatively small department, so to suddenly have to deal with all of this is a challenge they've never had to face before, and I bet you they're not staffed for it.
Well, on top of that is at least the intelligence that I've received is, one of the ways that you get things done quickly in Washington is you use existing mechanisms.
Right.
So if you have you've got a program that you use to fund, whether it's embassies or universities or, whatever it may be, law enforcement, you use existing mechanisms. But what we're hearing is that the department is not going to use any of their existing mechanisms. They're going to create something unique for this program, which means that takes longer.
Yeah, and give you a particular challenge trying to figure it out. We've got some questions coming in. Everybody, please send questions to Fernanda. Jim Sin asks, how many students, are any students left in dorms, or are the dorms completely cleared out? Are there international students who couldn't go home that you're having to care for? I mean, what's happened with that?
Yeah, so, we house about 5,000 students at any given time. And at this point, we're down to, I believe, 150. So we were able to very smoothly move the students out. The only students who remain are those who have nowhere to go. And so the 2 largest categories will be international students who can't get home, or would be domestic students who are literally homeless, that the residence hall is their home, that if they were to leave, they would not have a family to go to, they would not have shelter to go to. And so that was a case where we used the chat bot. We immediately, as we went into this world, made the students aware through Pounce that the residence halls would be closing, but that there was a mechanism where they could make a request to stay. And so we've done that. So at this point, there's, I believe, about 150 students, and that number continues to drop as students there identify somewhere else to go. But we've moved all those students into one building where every student has a private room and a private bath, so that the social distancing can take place. And then all dining halls are closed. So we basically, for the students who are remaining, we're able to prepare meals and have them pick up basically box lunches, box dinners. So
Sure.
it's a very small number, but we're at this point, we're trying to do everything we can to support those who literally have no other option.
A number of people asked about minority communities. Dr. Fauci last night said in their articles in all the major papers today that COVID is impacting minority communities at a higher proportion than the overall American population. Given GSU student demographics, I want to note here, just so everybody knows, GSU graduates more African American undergrads than any university in the United States. Are there unique approaches that GSU can take, is taking to reach out to those students and help those students?
So, let me go back. The way we get to graduating more African Americans than anybody else, and also we're also in the top 50, I think, for Asian Americans, and also certainly the largest in Georgia for Latino, Latina, and Hispanic students, is to approach where we basically try to serve the needs of all of our students, regardless of race or ethnicity. And so that has been working for us. The issue that Dr. Fauci spoke to in some ways mirrors a larger set of health disparities within the country. We know about income disparities, we know about education disparities, we also have health disparities. And the COVID-19 is particularly brutal, and there's no other way to say it, but the disease seems to be much worse for populations where obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, things which would include things like stroke, and cigarette smoking are more prevalent. And cigarette smoking doesn't have the same association with race and ethnicity as everything else I listed. But you look at maps of the US where you have large percentages of minorities, you also have large percentages of those morbidities, those conditions. Again, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, et cetera. And so that's part of what Dr. Fauci is talking about, is those who are most vulnerable are the ones that have some of these what are called comorbid conditions. And those conditions tend to be much more present in certain minority communities than not. And so that's been one of the big concerns. It's one of the big challenges. And probably the worst, most dramatic, and saddest case in America is Dougherty County, Georgia. A very large African-American population, very low income. And the disease there, in terms on a per capita basis, is right. I don't know about the exact numbers, how they match up with New York, but it's every bit as alarming as New York. But in terms of how we support our students, we make sure that we support them all and provide all the same resources to everybody, and that those resources are particularly looking to help students who have financial challenges. We're continuing to operate our health center and make sure that students that have health concerns and don't have anywhere else to go can access our health professionals, starting with telemedicine and being able to get them the advice and recommendations if that's where they have to get their health care. Likewise, we've ramped up being able with mental health and counseling, being able to develop those services and make sure that we have the appropriate staffing and technology to be able to continue to provide those services through this time as well. And then there's the emergency financial aid, because that's the other issue, is not only are the health outcomes disproportionately hitting minority communities, but the economic outcomes, the jobs that are, there's lots of sectors of the economy getting hit, but in particularly a lot of service sector jobs, and minorities are very heavily represented within the service sector economy.
Fernanda Lucchini asks, how do you think the way we're living now under the pandemic will reshape work norms and education norms once we go back, I don't know, a year from now, go back to something approaching normal?
Yeah, we talk a lot about this when we have spare time just to speculate. So let me start with education, because it's the one where I'm probably more qualified to speak. But I think when life gets back to normal, I don't think we're going to see a massive rush to online only. I think what we're learning from this is people actually like human interaction.
Sure.
Certainly my experience has been, even with my own children who are adults, phone calls that would have been 5 and 10 minutes a month ago are now an hour, just because people are they need to talk, and they need to talk to people that they know, and they need to talk to people they trust. So I think the brick and mortar model of education will still be there. There will be some institutions that are not going to survive this disruption, those that are economically fragile. But for Georgia State, what I think it is we will be much better and much more able to support not only our traditional learning modalities, but online. And what I think is going to be fairly typical, let's say in 2 and 3 years, is that just even a typical undergraduate Georgia State student coming out of high school to Georgia State, I mean, a lot of our students need to work while they go to school. I think what we'll see is that when they register for, let's say, 5 classes, 2 or 3 of those will be either a Monday, Wednesday, or a Tuesday, Thursday class, and then the other 2 or 3 will be online, so that they can work, let's say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And so I think what we'll see is that the students of the future coming out of this, and including the high school students who have gone through this, will be much more willing to blend the traditional face-to-face with the online, and it will allow them to be able to get their educations, in some cases perhaps even more quickly. Instead of taking 5 and 6 years, it may decrease time to degree, because of the flexibility of the scheduling of online, with being able to still get the high quality on campus, the internships, and all the rest of that. So I think that's what's most likely, and certainly that's what we're trying to prepare for. We think that's going to be where a lot of students will want to be, and particularly in the Georgia State demographics that we serve. For the nation, I think the more interesting question, I'll just take it for a local example, Delta Airlines. Obviously, Delta and all the airlines just completely hammered, operating schedules that are maybe 10% of what they were operating before this. Instead of doing 5 flights a day to London, they may probably be doing 5 or 6 international flights per day or per week period. So the question is, when we get on the other side of this, and we can now go back to our meetings and our travel and everything as before, our companies, as a cost-cutting measure, and our people who travel for a living, going to do more of the work like we're doing right now and travel less, because the demand for business travel, which is the lifeblood of the airline industry, it's people that go on vacation once a year are not where Delta makes their money. Delta makes their money on the consultants and the business people that travel literally every week. And if those folks that are traveling every week start traveling, let's say every other week or once a month, that changes that industry. It also then changes the hotel industry, et cetera. So I think we're going to see some sectors of the economy may come out of this recession more slowly than we expected even a week or 2 ago. Mm-hmm. And they may look very different on the other side.
Karen Locke asks, if you have some thoughts of the impact on international students for the fall semester and beyond. Are there going to be fewer international students, or people going to be less willing to study abroad?
I think we're going to deal with, there's a couple of issues we're going to deal with there. I think in terms of students going abroad, we may see it'll take a little bit longer for that to return to what I'll call normal levels. And certainly the stories of people getting stranded abroad are, frightening. Yep. But in terms of international enrollments, this is a huge issue for us because the standard exams, the GREs, the GMATs, the LSATs, et cetera, you can't take those overseas because everything got shut down. Now, Georgia State and other universities, we've suspended certain requirements for standardized tests, and we've done that for just in-state students as well. We're not requiring the SAT or the ACT because people can't get it right now. So we create that flexibility, and that works well for students here. But for students who are abroad, there's the complicating factor is getting a visa. And so, this is your world, Charles. You know all about issuing student visas. And so the consulates, they've been scaled back, shut down. So students can't get those visas even if we do admit them. And then on top of that, the visa requirements, and this is some of the relief that higher education is seeking in Washington, is typically those student visas have been tied to the beginning of the semester. And so one of the proposals that I know is being made in DC this week on behalf of higher ed is to loosen the requirement that the visa requires that you be here at the start of the semester for the scenario where the student may start their education at a distance until they get their visa, and then once they get the visa, come here and continue it face to face. So we're seeking some, that request of course goes to your former employer, the U.S. State Department.
Well, they got to reopen the consular sections. I mean, right now, all the consular sections are shut for visa issuance and are busy worrying about American citizens and how to get them home.
Yeah, so let's go back to that business model question. So compare Fernanda and Karen's question is, for Georgia State, that's definitely, as you mentioned, 3,000 international students, that's a hit. But we've got some institutions, the nearest one would be the Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, but universities like the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where they literally have tens of thousands of students from China alone. And I know that for a different reason, at one point, Illinois took out a policy with Lloyd's of London against dropping their Chinese enrollment. They didn't have it for COVID, I don't think, or at least if they did, they're not talking about it yet. But the Purdue's, the Michigan States, the Georgia Techs, the Illinois and Urbana-Champaign, these are thousands of students. It's going to be a huge hit on their business model, at least near term, and we'll see how quickly, if ever, it returns to the levels that it was prior to this pandemic.
So we're drawing to the end of our period. So let me ask you, as you look in your crystal ball, look forward to what's going to happen, what positive changes are going to come out of this? I mean, we've all stopped, we're all at home, we're all rethinking how we get educated, how we work, how we raise our children, and how we interact with people. What positive is going to come from this?
So I actually think there's going to be a lot of positives. Now, I'm a glasses half full person. We will get through this. The world got through past the 1918 pandemic flu, got past the 1929 stock market crash and the recession. The world got past World War II. We got past the 2008, 2009 recession, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, et cetera. We'll get through this. And I think a couple of the positives we're already seeing, certainly as a university, but I think also as a country, there have been mistakes, there have been problems, but all in all, I think, people are responding. We're seeing, there have been some egregious examples where people haven't been responsible, like spring break in Miami or in the Florida beaches not that long ago. That kind of stuff is disturbing, but overall, we are seeing that people are willing to come together. We've seen that our Congress, which was more than sclerotic, was basically frozen, could come together in bipartisan legislation. Let's hope that that bipartisan sense will last longer than just this epidemic, that will actually get government working again in Washington for us. But I think one of the most heartening things for those of us in the university world is the response of the university and the corporate research community to this virus has been unprecedented. The collaboration between researchers all around the world in universities and in government labs and in private companies' labs like pharmaceuticals, biotechs, is on an unprecedented level. I mean, people always talk about the Manhattan Project in World War II, to create a nuclear bomb. Was a great scientific work of bringing together the best minds and getting to work on that one focused mission. But that was important in that part of history. But what you're seeing right now is unprecedented. It's inspiring. People are putting their personal scientific careers aside to try to solve this issue. And just to be clear, there's multiple research tracks with this virus. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that one is just understanding the immune response to having had this coronavirus. We do certainly know that if you've had the virus, your body will produce antibodies. What we don't know is if that immune response is sufficient to make you immune from a second infection. And if it does make you immune from a second infection, how long will you have that immunity? We don't know the answer to those questions right now. So that's question number one, is just getting the antibody test, getting that out. That's fairly straightforward. that work's going. We should see that. But once we have those tests, we still have a lot to learn about the immune response to having been infected. Second is work then on antivirals. People are well familiar with antibiotics. Probably everybody on this call has taken an antibiotic at some point in their life. They're game changers in terms of giving you relief from bacterial infections. Viruses are different. Antivirals are harder to develop. We don't have the same toolkit with antivirals that we have with antibiotics. But there's a tremendous amount of work being done with antivirals, including things that people have read about in the press, whether it had to do with malaria or with Ebola, trying to use some things that are on the shelves, trying to do the research to see whether they work against this coronavirus, developing new antivirals with promising therapeutic work that's been done in animal models. And then, of course, the vaccine. We get a vaccine, we get back to normal much faster, but vaccines are difficult. Vaccines for viruses are very difficult. Influenzas, you take annually because we're not yet at a universal flu vaccine. There's a lot of work in that space, including people at Georgia State and people at the University of Georgia working in that space. But in terms of a universal coronavirus, we're not there, or a specific coronavirus vaccine. But it's really inspiring to see the way the research community is coming around all these research questions. That's because there's so many questions, so much work to be done, so much to be learned. And we know that once we get to the other side of this, there's going to be more coronaviruses. We're all familiar with coronaviruses because that's the family that the common cold comes out of. It's just that this one is not the common cold. It's on the level of perhaps 1918 pandemic flu. So I'm positive about that. I think what we're all learning is that we can be more adaptable than even what we believe in ourselves. Certainly, if you told me that Georgia State in 2 weeks would go from face-to-face instruction to educating at a distance, and we would have as few as problems as we've had in terms of whether they be technology issues, students engaging with the material, faculty being able to get their material up and being accessed by students, I wouldn't have believed that we could do it as well as we've done it. So I continue to believe in the human spirit, our ability to adapt and respond. And fundamentally, I grew up in a home with parents who lived through the Depression. They learned a lot of lessons from that stuck with them for their lives. And certainly some of those were impressed upon me. Some of the things that they believed I thought were ridiculous. Now I get a greater sense of why they had those points of view based on what they had experienced. And I think for our students, as well as for those of us that are older, we're going to learn a lot from this, and hopefully we'll be better for it because it's a terrible thing to have to go through.
It sure is. Mark Becker, I want to thank you very much for spending 45 minutes with us. This has been great. I've learned a lot. I hope everybody else on this call has as well. And time's just flown by. So thank you for the time. Thank you all, everybody who's listening. Thank you to Ladarian Gillette, who's been our producer, made all this work so seamlessly, and for Fernanda, who's been taking those questions, repackaging them, and sending them to me. Tomorrow at 1, we've got a program on gender dynamics of pandemics with Camille Davis, who's a senior manager at CARE. His program's organized by our young leaders. It'll be very cool. Please register. And then Friday at 1, we've got Robert Abernathy, one of our board members, who is the former CEO of Halyard Health, a company that makes surgical masks and gowns and the personal protective equipment that we've all been talking about. And he's got unique insights on why we're having such problems gearing up and suddenly producing more of that. So that's going to be Friday at 1 with Robert Abernathy. Why are there no face masks? So thank you very much. Everybody, please, I hope everybody has a great Passover tonight. I don't see you tomorrow or Friday. I hope you have a good Easter. Those of you who are celebrating Easter, a joyous Easter on Sunday. So Mark Becker, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Charles, pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.